Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to the Learn and Teach and Student Experience Conference 2021. So on behalf of the Chartered Association of Business Schools and the Learn and Teach and Student Experience Committee, we welcome you to the conference. Thanks to Oliver and the team for putting together again a really packed programme, and it promises to be a thought-provoking and stimulating couple of days as we exchange ideas and practice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cathy Minett-Smith. I'm the Associate Dean, Learning, Teaching, Student Experience in the Faculty of Business and Law at the University of West of England, and I'm Vice Chair of the Chartered Association of Business Schools Learning, Teaching, Student Experience Committee, which is quite a mouthful. So to kick off today, a consequence of the rapid changes in delivery is that as educators, we need to keep up. Our ongoing development of teaching practice has become more important than ever before. So I'm delighted that the Chartered ABS scheme, the Certified Management and Business Educator, is available to all of us. And this conference is a really good example of that scheme. Over the past 2 years, educators that hold CMBE have collectively undertaken over 40,000 hours of continuous development in their teaching and leadership, aiding their ability to keep abreast of changes in the classroom and to have a positive impact on their student experiences. Nearly 50 of the sessions at this conference are being run by CMBEs, which is really fantastic to see. So this is your conference for members of Chartered ABS, so please get actively involved. Ask questions and contribute to discussions. You can engage in the sessions by looking at the Stage tab on the right-hand side of your screen rather than the Event tab, and use the chat feed to contribute to the discussion and the Q&A feed to ask questions. So we're kicking off the conference with a panel discussion where we're exploring how students are redefining the classroom, which was a phrase that emerged in a session that CABS hosted jointly with Canadian colleagues in May this year. So how have students influenced, informed and responded to how business and management education has been delivered during COVID? And as a result, how are their needs and expectations shaping learning and teaching in the year ahead and into the future? So we've got a great panel to help us get the thought juices going at 9 o'clock on day one. We've got Sonia Dickinson, who's Dean of Learning and Teaching in the Faculty of Business and Law at Curtin University in Australia. Esther Jubb, who's Head of Academic Services at Pearson. Salma Hussain, who's President of King's College Students' Union. And hopefully we will have Osama, who's Pro-Vice Chancellor of Education at Surrey University, but is currently having some technical difficulties. So hopefully he will be joining us. So the format of this session is that each of our panelists will speak for around 5 minutes before we open up the session for discussion. Please post your questions in the Q&A tab as our panelists present their thoughts, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A tab and then trying to manage the Q&A process as we come to the end of the panelists doing their brief introductions. So without further ado, because I want to leave maximum time for you guys to chat, I'm going to hand over to Sonia.
Thanks so much, Cathy. So it's really lovely to be connected with my fellow panelists today, as well as everybody virtually. I can see lots of welcomes in the chat session, so I can see everyone's well and truly across how to use the Q&A, which is wonderful. I look forward to a great discussion and some curly questions that we all consider together. So as Cathy mentioned, my name's Sonia Dickinson. I'm based in Perth, Western Australia, not Perth, Scotland, I should clarify. And I work at Curtin University, and it provides some context to perhaps some of the comments I'll make regarding the question we've been asked to address. So Curtin University has around 60,000 students, and within our business school, we have around 8,000 students, of which sort of 80% are undergraduate. In my role as Chair of the Australian Business Deans Council Learning and Teaching Network, I represent 39 Australian business faculties and schools. So it's really great to sort of bring together today in terms of this session, not only the happenings at Curtin University, but also more broadly across universities in Australia. In terms of my preliminary comments, I thought I might start by commenting on how students have influenced business schools during the COVID crisis before I make some remarks on what they're influencing and continue to influence into the commencing academic year. This is really important because how students are influencing has really shifted, I think, as a result of COVID. Over the last 3 to 5 years, I think it's fair to say pre-COVID, Australian universities have been very much committed to implementing students as partner strategies at both the university and faculty level, with growing language around working with students and in harnessing the student voice and power sharing, with students impacting on curricula, co-design opportunities for curricular and extracurricular programming. But if we're contrasting pre-COVID with now, in terms of student influence, I would say that there have been some key changes, and they're around the depth and the immediacy of student influence. So that is pre-COVID, like I'm sure your business schools, we've always gathered student feedback and valued the student voice. But we've probably done that in a really asynchronous manner. We've done that at the end of a semester. We've looked at quality indicators annualized. We might have quarterly student consultative committees or the like. During COVID, however, this influence really changed to much more of a synchronous influence over what we were delivering. And so some of that feedback or the way that was gathered was live, with a 24-hour turnaround in terms of response. So very much a you said, we did, and a lot of unit level influence that students were having in terms of what was happening in the classroom. Now and into the future, though, in terms of how they're influencing, I'd say it's a much deeper influence that we are seeing. And it's not so much at the unit level, but much more at the strategic level. And there's that deepening of what they're influencing. We're seeing that as we, not only commence into the immediate study period, but if you look at our 3 to 5 year strategies, we are harnessing that student influence in making decisions about our delivery strategy. So transitioning from blended or into further blended and into high flex. And we are harnessing the student voice and recognising that it's not one size fits all, and we need to be informed by students how we might alter our delivery roadmap over the next 3 to 5 years to accommodate undergrad, postgrad, MBA, exec ed, as well as our micro-credential strategy student cohorts as well. The student influence has deepened not only to our delivery strategy, but our quality standards, moving above and beyond any regulatory requirements, but really responding to what we need to deliver to students to meet their minimum requirements around engagement in an online setting. Given we see that this will continue to grow and we'll continue to invest appropriately in how that delivery might look into the future. Students are influencing PD, co-designing, co-delivering. If you look at the influence, I know in my business school, when we've seen unit level feedback around some of the gaps in delivery, we've harnessed that to have more of a faculty approach, understanding and students sharing with us best practice, and then having a strategy that will be informed over, a 12-month period where we have multiple sessions that target a particular area, and that's informed and co-created by students. Not at my university, but broadly across the Australian Business Deans Network, we're also seeing people and culture impacts, the student voice and university strategy and forward directions around how we accommodate that student voice and harness it has seen appointments. We have in one university the appointment of a professor of blended delivery, and you have SWAT teams essentially that come out into faculties and work to look at how disciplines can tap into or bridge the gap between what student expectations are and where the current discipline is sitting in terms of how they're delivering in engaging ways in online environments. So many impacts, and essentially if I'd encapsulate this student experience, it really has shifted from being something that we react to as business schools to something that we proactively engage with, and it's really guiding us, not just as being reactive, but proactive in harnessing for the next, strategic plan and looking at 3 to 5 years in advance. And I say it's that deepening of a partnership with students, and that they're really redefining what we're doing, and we're deepening that definition to not just at the unit level, but really more broadly delivery and movement into blended delivery and into high flex and what that looks like, ensuring pedagogy aligns with those expectations, and very much our strategic approach when it comes to aligning with student expectations. In terms of the forthcoming academic year in Australia, we're midway through the academic year. And, you know, we've just come out of one of our main semester teaching periods. And I would say that in terms of the impacts and ongoing, it's much of a muchness. And if I could put in context Australia on the global stage, I would say that, you know, COVID impacts in Australia with closed borders have been nowhere near to what you've seen globally, and yet we remain, I guess, very prepared to pivot fully online at any point in time, fully prepared for any lockdown, despite there not being extensive lockdown in Australia, although different by state. But essentially what it means is our delivery has remained blended, our lectures have remained online, but our tutorials and workshops have been face-to-face. Our assessment remains fully online. We don't do any face-to-face assessment. All invigilation, and universities have investigated in, you know, remote invigilation software to accommodate that, and just continuing to bed down our strategies around well-being for students who are, you know, feeling a little disconnected, lack of connection with their peers, so on and so forth. So for us, as we've come midway into our academic year and we'll continue, it's very much we feel that we are doing many of the things that we did throughout 2020 as well, really needing to pivot at any point, depending on the situation arising. So I hope those preliminary comments address the questions, and I'll hand back to Cathy, who can introduce the next speaker.
Thanks, Sonia. That was really useful, and the questions are starting to come in. I'll pass on to Esther now to get your thoughts.
Thank you, Cathy. Thank you, Sonia, for a great start. Thank you to CABS also for inviting me to speak. This is one of my favourite conferences to speak at, either virtually or in person, to be honest. So I'm looking forward to a great session. I wanted to build a little bit on what Sonia's been talking about. In Pearson, we worked very closely with Wonky during 2020 and 2021 to undertake some research with students through our own student panel, but also through Wonky's Students' Union connections. And we surveyed for over 2 periods, something like 3,000 odd students on a variety of programs across a variety of different types of universities in the UK. And we were really interested in what their experiences of study during the COVID pandemic were, real honest appraisal of it, and also then what their expectations were for the future. And I think whilst not focused necessarily on business schools, some of the themes that come through from my experience of supporting business programs fully online, and also of leading business programs in universities myself, there's a number of really interesting elements that learners are telling us about, and then also challenging us to meet the needs of. So our first survey in July 2020 was very much focused on what were their experiences of that very rapid pivot that universities had to do to moving things online. And whilst there were, the thing that struck me most about the outcomes from that research was the variability of the learner experience in that response, and the different ways in which different universities responded, some more effectively than others, to supporting their needs. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was that more than anything else, students told us that they were very concerned about their well-being, their personal well-being, their ability to focus on their learning, their ability to achieve the outcomes that they wanted. And whilst they recognised that this was a response to emergencies, that it was emergency remote teaching, it wasn't necessarily a curated and designed learning experience, there was still some real challenges for them about the need for universities to provide consistency. Then if we shift forward to November, we surveyed a similar sample of students and asked them about their, I just need to pull up the expectation survey was very much, in November, we were asking them about what they wanted and expected from their universities for that current teaching period. So when we were returning to campus, potentially having more blended or hybrid learning experiences. And this reflection on their semester one experiences was really, really interesting in that they saw a dramatically improved access to many of the resources that they felt they needed for learning. So universities had really stepped up their library access, for example, and their access to e-journals and e-resources. They were still, however, challenged by understanding what their own personal progress was. So whilst there may be some in-person teaching, they didn't necessarily feel that they were getting the support that they needed to know where they were in their courses and whether or not they were progressing at the rate that they should be. And this was an expectation that they felt would be better met by universities at this time. And then they were also concerned around the challenges of more variety in the online learning experience, but also more consistency. And I get that there's a tension between these two things. In designing online programs, when I work with universities, we talk about this tension quite a lot, that students like consistency and predictability because they like to know where they are and they like to maximize their time on effort on key things. But then they also don't want to be doing the same things over and over again because then that becomes repetitious and boring. And I think that the move to September and that first semester of teaching was in some respects, there was sufficient change in the tone and the tempo of the learning and teaching experience for learners for them to be more positive about it. However, there was still some real areas of challenge for them that they had expected universities to address. And then one of the last questions that we asked them in this research was around what are the things that moving forward you would really like to retain about the hybrid, the blended experience that you've potentially had during the first semester. And the thing that came through most clearly was that they wanted to retain the digital access to the support services that the university provided. So many universities really stepped up in providing things like welfare services, careers services, student support services, fully digitally and online and remotely, for the sake of their own staff who are working in the universities, being able to continue their roles and to continue to provide support for students. And students really benefited and felt that this was a huge step forward for them. And you can see why, because if you're a commuter student, you don't necessarily want to have to come onto campus for a 15-minute study skills or 20-minute study skills support meeting when you could potentially do that remotely. They also, whilst saying that they were concerned about understanding how they were progressing, they really liked the affordances that the technology brought for things like online formative assessment and almost immediate feedback on progress, and that they really wanted that to remain as part of the offer. And you can see why, for students who are potentially having to be more independently focused in their learning, understanding where they are and how they're progressing would be a lot more of benefit for them. They also expected, and not unsurprisingly, and knowing what the mix of practices across universities in the UK, the expectation moving forward is that all the core learning materials would be available for them through their institutional VLE, that they wouldn't be encumbered in having access to them by potentially not being able to be on campus, and that it would all be provided for them on the VLE. And I think that's a pretty big cultural shift for many universities in contemplating that they actually would, that there is an expectation that all the materials would be there, and then the on-campus and live events are perhaps something slightly different than just a lecture, for example. And then finally, and something that's always quite contentious, is that lecture recordings would be available. And again, I think that builds on the wanting the resources accessible to them at any time and at their disposal and convenience. And I get that this is a contentious issue, but it's one of the things that the learners really felt strongly they wanted to retain moving forward into whatever the sense of normal delivery would be beyond the pandemic. So near the end of the session, I will share the web links to these 2 pieces of research so that you've got access to them, because they are absolutely illuminating. And we use them a lot in our work in supporting universities to consider the things that they might want to provide for their learners, either for fully online or for blended programs. So hopefully that's triggered some questions, and I'm going to pass back to Cathy now to pass on to the next speaker.
Thanks, Esther. And Cathy remembered to put her mic back on, so really I've woken up. I'm going to pass to Osama now. Is that okay, Osama? Thank you for joining us and persevering with the technology.
Good morning, colleagues on the panel and everybody who are listening to us. It's also been an absolute pleasure to be here, despite of a bit of a digital traffic that I was facing while joining the session. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and privilege to share some of the thinking that we are forming at Surrey and in more widely how business education are evolving. As a fellow academic in the business school, it's always been a pleasure to come to this conference with CABS and sharing ideas. So I just wanted to give you a quick context, Cathy and colleagues, if you don't mind, about where we stand at Surrey. So Surrey, obviously, just like any other university, the second semester of the last academic year was a Wild West situation. It was basically completely whatever you could do, whichever tool you can pick up, just delivered the teaching, try to finish the academic year. But as we were really struggling and coping with online education at the start of the pandemic, we also put together a multifaceted online education team, which primarily led by our Surrey Institute of Education, but also representative from the faculties. And we really put our minds down in terms of what would be the principles of hybrid education, the pedagogic design and the infrastructural requirement, as well as training for our community to cope with that in the longer term. We realized that as much as we like this horrendous pandemic to be over, it's going to stay with us. That was the realization in the last May, June. So we put together a principle. This principle was no matter whether the learners are predominantly on campus or predominantly off campus or a mixture of them. So there is a continuum of 100% of your students are present at class on campus, or 100% of your students are logged down or from their home, or a mixture of that, as you can imagine. We will always provide them a beautifully curated community building virtual learning environment where the cognitive load of our students wouldn't be around navigation and how to do things. The cognitive load of our students would be how to get excited about finance or human resources or marketing or business cases. So we really put a lot of effort, and I must say that our colleagues have been astronomically cooperative at Surrey over the last summer. So we all put our module beautifully done on a very structured template on virtual learning environment with a lot of scaffolding for formative assessment, summative assessment, and community building. What I mean by community building, we created weekly tasks for our students to do with themselves or with their peers. And that was systematically done in every module, in every subject at Surrey. I will talk about what happened in Surrey Business School because I really feel extremely proud of what happened at Surrey Business School around active digital design, but I'll come to that in a minute. So that was basically our principle. We went for it. Lectures will be recorded in bite size, 20 to 30 minutes. Everything else will be basically delivered face-to-face. And we were fortunate that we didn't have a breakout on campus. In the first semester of the academic year, we did manage to deliver 62% of our timetable session face-to-face. So very similar to what Sonia was basically explaining in terms of our principle. All our assessments were online. Now, during this time, we also forged some of the best and most strongest partnership with our students. Everything that we have done, including that online team, had student representative, and we constantly spoke with our students through focus group, through surveys, through module evaluation question and COVID-related surveys. I think there was a bit of a survey fatigue, I must admit, but we really wanted to talk to our students, and the student union were shoulder to shoulder with us, planning for this future of the education. So I was so pleased with that. So what did we do? We realized what we learned from our students, that our students are saying our voice is very important. You need to forge a partnership with us because the difficulty of learning is on us. You're delivering content, you're curating content, but we are learning. So could you please pay attention what really takes our learning? They also talked about lectures dotted with lots of peer activity, more like workshops. But if you have to lecture, please stream that if possible, record it, if possible, pre-record it in bite size and release it well in advance in time. They also asked about lab simulation, seminar, workshop, tutorial. Our students a more effective way of learning. In terms of exams, they understand that certain PSRB requirement means that we have to do exam, but can we take the time pressure out? So we did 24-hour exam during this time, but moving out of pandemic, we are thinking how our exams could be 4-hour or 6-hour for a 2-hour typical exam paper. And then also lastly, but not least, as Esther mentioned, that a lot of our services has been hybrid. So we provided the core text electronically in every module at SARI during this pandemic. We are going to continue that. All our services, whether it's finance support, well-being support, academic skills, were all available hybrid, either face-to-face or online. We are keeping that in the longer term. And of course, as we just already discussed, personal tutoring, dissertation supervision. Why do we have to make a trip to see Professor Khan for half an hour all the way from London? We can always do that online. So I think what I would say, it has been really a refreshed community effort to work collaboratively with our students collaboratively. Recently, 7 of our students across the campus finished a comprehensive qualitative and quantitative evaluation of our hybrid education principle. We are about to get a presentation from the student union president and that team about what they have learned and what they want the university to do. Lastly, active digital design is something that our Surrey Business School have applied. They consistently ran workshop for our academics, and I will really encourage you to Google the term and figure out what happened at Surrey. Thank you.
Thanks, Osama. And now I'll pass over to Salma.
Thank you, Cathy. So just as a reminder, I'm a very different panelist. I am on the other side of teaching and learning. So I'm president of King's College London Students Union. Up until July 2020, I was a proud biochemist. So not business students, apologies, but it's fine. We have very many similarities. And I think it's very important to be thinking about what we have learned from the pandemic and what we can take forward. There are many students who have appreciated being able to access lectures online. And it's something which I know the student union has been, many student unions across the country have been campaigning for, having that consistent access to lectures online. And there are various departments which will push back for various reasons. Perhaps we can't use technology, our lectures aren't suitable for online. Yet this year and a half has showed, no, you can have your teaching online. And that is so important for certain communities of our students. Disabled students who can't get onto campus or have difficulties making the commute, especially in a London-based university, we have so many commuter students. That allows them to engage with lectures and other services from home. We saw one of the Exeter VPs from the student union recently started a hashtag online, My Accessible Pandemic, explaining how the pandemic has actually made things more accessible. So what parts of accessibility can we take forward? But when we're taking this forward, we do need to be thinking about the students who are missing campus like crazy. My campus at university is my home. I love it to bits, and it's partially why I stayed on for another year, because I did not want to leave King's. But the crux of the matter is, you come to university to get your education, but your lectures aren't what you remember. I was talking to one of my friends about what do we actually remember from university, and it was a very weird interactions that would happen with other students in computer rooms when we were supposed to be doing our assessments, but we'd end up doing something else. Or when we walk into the lecture, the 5 minutes before when you're chatting, something very odd happens, or the lecturer says very weird things, and you have interactions with them. And those are the memories. And how can we maintain those memories in a way where everyone's online, everyone's tired, everyone basically just wants to be done. They don't want to see the lectures. And it's something which I saw when I was a student, that so I was lucky my department had consistent lecture capture recordings. And if I sat in a lecture 1 hour, I would only listen to that lecture for 1 hour. Now, if you're doing lecture capture recording, it can take 3-4 hours because you keep pausing. And it's about maintaining, how can we make that inclusive and not having as draining? As we said, survey fatigue, digital fatigue. We do need to think long-term about how we're going to keep both, because as much as students may want to have the fully online experience with access to some online sessions if they want to, that's not going to happen. Lecturers do not have the time to be teaching 2 sets of session, one online, one in person. So we need to be thinking how we can make it blended or make it one load, perhaps students tuning in at the same time being able to watch the live lecture and ask questions. And thinking about space constraints. COVID isn't getting away anytime soon. Thinking about how we can optimize the different good parts of the pandemic, and how can you do that other than asking students? If you ask students, oh, why is your issue? Why don't you like online learning? And finding out what parts of it are the issues and then fixing it. It's so important to engage with your student reps and student unions to see what bits aren't working, because a lot of them are quick fixes. There's so many little things which I've brought up to the university which fix the next day. And it's just about understanding what the issue is and then how we can fix it. And we really need to be thinking about inclusive assessment. It is very unlikely that we are going to be trekking 3,000 students all the way to Kensington Olympia on the other side of London for exams. So what are we going to do instead? We do need to be thinking about PRSB requirements. We have medicine courses, so some of them were online, in-person assessment this year. We do have issues with disabled students having 24-hour exams the exact same time as another student, but they're not able to get the extra time they're entitled to. Is that inclusive? And how do we combat plagiarism and collusion and all these other academic integrity issues? We need to be ensuring that we are speaking to the students, understanding the issues, because it's so easy to collude online. I don't understand what the essay question means. Let me just text a friend. That is collusion, but it doesn't feel like collusion because it's just, what do you think of the question? So we really need to be thinking about this in partnerships with both the students and student learning, and thinking about how this engages the student experience. Students miss being on campus. They miss talking to others, miss even talking to academics. So how do we embrace this whilst also keeping our campuses safe, keeping the interaction going, understanding how we can build this community? So it's not just the students, we've got the short end of the stick, we're still paying extortionate fees for international students, whilst getting what it feels like a subpar education, because there is inconsistency. As Esther said, there's inconsistency and variability in, if I was a student and I wanted a response to my assessment query, I'd send an email. Now I can't go up to the lecturer. Now I can not get a response. So we do need to be thinking about what methods we have of accountability in that terms as well. But it's just very important to listen to the student voice and actually act upon the feedback, making sure that they feel heard and not just a tick box tokenistic exercise, because otherwise we're not going to get anywhere. NSS scores are going to go down, and everyone will be unhappy. So happiness is listening to the students and then acting on the changes. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Salma. Thanks to all our panelists for some really thought-provoking contributions. There are lots of questions in the chat, which I've been trying to keep track of. So Sonia, I'm going to come to you first just to kick us off, because you've had the longest breather. And this was a question from Sarah Bird, but it got picked up in some of the other questions as well, and I've got a lot of thumbs up in the questions. So students often see traditional lectures as the real university experience. After a year of being online portrayed as backup, how do we support students to accept value and engage in blended learning? So it's the value for money piece, which I know has been a big topic of conversation in recent months.
Yep. My response would be similar to what Osama said, in that I think business schools need to have a clear, it can't be at the unit level. There has to be leadership around what the roadmap looks like, what the minimum quality standard is, and the professional development that will underpin the quality standard in place. Students are looking for assurance that they know that really what they're going to get, and it's irrespective of whether it's a finance discipline or marketing discipline, what have you, but there needs to be clear faculty or business school I guess, strategy around what the minimum quality standards are, how that would be supported or underpinned by professional development. And to also be quite clear, so Osama gave the example where, for example, a lecture component is modularized, bite-sized chunks of content, very similar to what we see happening in Australian business schools. And students can obviously tune into that, information online at their own pace, but we've still retained the face-to-face component. Now, I think we need to get better at demonstrating value in what is that face-to-face component. So often, if you think about how business schools describe that, it would be called in Australia a tutorial or a workshop or something like that. But if we're really trying to communicate value, I think we need to be really specific with students about what they're doing in that space and make sure our pedagogy allows for those experiences that are face-to-face to be high value, experiential learning, industry connected, so that when a student is coming, not all of their learning might be face-to-face, a portion is pre-learning, but the time they do have face-to-face, they should have clear expectations around facilitated engagement, industry, connections with practice. They should know that they're going to have a strong experience in that face-to-face setting. I would also say that in terms of demonstrating value, we probably need to get better as to what we call things, because we're not clearly articulating to students, well, what does a workshop mean? Is that an innovation lab? Is that a hackathon? Is that a panel event? What are you getting when you come to that face-to-face experience? So they're feeling, okay, I get this. My pre-learning is just some theory, some modularized content that I can learn from and bring into that face-to-face component. So very much that blended is recognizing or communicating to students what the expectations are around how pre-learning interacts with any face-to-face component. But I think ultimately the value and some of the questions posed around then, I think HighFlex is ultimately the solution that fits all needs, because you can opt into, in terms of how you want to learn. It can be face-to-face, it can be off campus, it can be synchronous or asynchronous, and it goes to the point that there are differing expectations that you will have for MBA students as opposed to undergraduate, postgraduate, exec ed. And yeah, you need to have an overarching faculty strategy that communicates the expectations so students know the value that they'll be receiving. But at the end of the day, I think that consideration of moving from blended into HighFlex where there is choice, which goes to Salma's point that, different student voices are saying different things and we can't be everything. But if you're transitioning from blended into those HighFlex, you potentially have the ability to service more broadly and bridge that gap in expectation and delivery.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. Did any of our other panelists have anything to add to that question? Or I pick up another theme. Okay, prepare yourself, Osama, because this theme's coming your way in to begin with. There are quite a few questions in the chat around community building and hearing how people have gone about building communities, things that have worked and things that haven't worked, and how in online environments do you encourage students to engage in inclusive learning communities online?
Thank you. That's a very pertinent question. One of the biggest things that we are missing, or perhaps even now, as I said that I just like Esther and all the other panel members love to come to CAP's conference, but I would have had about 10 micro conversations by this time over coffee and biscuits and come up with great ideas. And that's exactly what our students are missing. They're missing those conversations they would have had waiting for the lecture, moving into the lecture room or moving out of a seminar room, or just having a conversation next door to their friends saying that, have you started the assignment? Has it worked? What are you doing? All those things are not happening. We are in our room and doing this virtual conversation. So one of the things that we realized, we use Zoom for our teaching, and we realized that once the Zoom call is over, it's over. There is nothing you can continue. So our computer science department, for example, said that, Osama, we would like to do an experiment. We would like to do Teams, because in Teams, if the recording gets posted in a chat, and that chat of the event remains for further conversation. So I have heard our students, in fact, our students came to us saying that they would like to do Netflix party type situation where they can listen to our lectures together and then critique it. So one of the things we tried in the limitation of Zoom not offering that continuity of conversation is we opened up Panopto's continuity of conversation. So you can listen to a recording together, maybe on a Zoom call like a Netflix party. I wish my lecture is as exciting as a movie, but why not think about it in that way? But that worked. So students can chat and kind of say, don't understand what Osama is saying on the 5th minute about stock market going up and down in 2008. And then now we are really paying attention how we can make sure the serendipitous conversation could continue beyond the Zoom session, beyond the team session, and that's important. The other thing I would also say, no matter what, we have to provide them a socially cohesive and inclusive space, physical space. So at Surrey, and I must say that we have been fortunate not to have the pandemic impacting us with the outbreak on campus, we created a massive marquee which can contain up to 300, as far as I understand, students in a socially distant way. And the marquee has been a greatest popular thing among the students. So it was an extension of our study space and the library. So if you can't have enough space in the library, come to the marquee, the sides are open. And after 5 and 6, we even managed to get some social event in the marquee as well. So I think what I would say, no matter what is our aspiration for blended learning and hybrid education might be, let's liberate our offices. Do I really need this office? I love my office, but I haven't used it. I run the university from home. So can we give this to our students for really socially constructive space where they can come together, study alone when they need with others in a cafe culture, or maybe just mingle with others. So we created a space called Surrey Nest along that theme. And we're exploring how more Surrey Nest can be available at Surrey for the social interactivity.
Thanks, Osama.
If you don't mind, Cathy, I think there's also something around, and I love the idea of a Netflix party, Osama. I think it's just, it builds on something that I've seen other organisations do, where they have the technology, they're able to actually have open video conference meetings that students can sit in. And I even know my colleagues do this, that they miss being in the office. And so they sit on Teams doing their work. And we have the technology to allow this. We have the technology to allow students to meet in this way. And I think it also takes a lot of encouragement from academic colleagues to tell students that there's a benefit to this. So we know that students will engage in things that academics tell them will be important and useful. So we all know that e-portfolios are a challenge because most academics are like, I don't really know what to do with the e-portfolio. And where we have academic colleagues that really encourage the engagement with reflective practice and e-portfolios, students really get into it. When we have academic colleagues who are encouraging and saying, you know, it may not be your first choice of experience, but there is an additional community of practice that you can develop through this online environment. You know, it's really interesting. I do this, even if you don't do it with your own family or your own colleagues. You know, I get a value out of this. Then learners will see that there is a value and take up the opportunity. But the behaviours have to be positively reinforced by the people that the learners respect. It's not just a case of telling them to do it and expecting them to do it. It's not the field of dreams. We don't build it and they come automatically. We have to nurture them and curate them. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for building community online, but it takes, a bit like any community of practice, you have to work at it in the start. You can't just expect it to spontaneously generate its own activity.
Can I just add to that very, very quickly? So we've done a few things. So we've ran some, so we have a peer support wellbeing session scheme in KCLSU called Positive Peers, who promote positive mental wellbeing through other students. And one thing they've been running is Pomodoro sessions online. So students can come on, put their cameras on, work for 25 minutes and 5 minutes. And I think students have really valued that. The other thing which I heard a student was saying that their department was doing is you'd have your tutorial for a certain number of time and they would open it half an hour earlier. So you could go in and chat to other students for half an hour, which can be hugely valuable. That's what we're missing. However, I will caveat this with, we have been talking about this and students are just tired. I think they're absolutely exhausted with these online events. And I think although they are good in the short term, and we do need to understand this approach to the new normal, we do need to be thinking about the in-person events as well and how we can still have fun in person, even if it is socially distanced, even if it is with masks. I put on a series of in-person events last week in celebration of getting through this year, essentially. And I can't tell you how excited people were to see people in real life. I met people who I've been conversing with all year online, and I thought, oh, that's how tall you are. Interesting. And it's just hugely valuable. So I would say, yes, online events are great. You'll get increased attendance. We do need to be thinking about the in-person ones as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Salma. I'm not surprised this has bubbled up as a question, because again, it's something people are talking about a lot, about the community. There's a strong thread of papers around this theme in the conference this year, and a quick plug for a session tomorrow where we're launching dynamic conversations for cabs. And this is the first conversation which we're going to be having through that. So if you want to know more, pop into that session tomorrow. And that's a shameless plug because I'm leading it. But anyway, back to the questions. Right at the beginning, Sonia, when you were speaking, a question emerged. And I'm going to go to Salma first, but that's where this theme started, when Sonia was talking around how you prepare students for partnership and partnership working. And then there is a question in the chat which has got lots of thumbs up. So I will go to Salma first. But it's people on the call are interested to know how you get a representative student voice in partnerships, not just working with the students who are already engaged, but also trying to reach those students who are harder to reach, which overlaps with what the previous question was around preparing students for partnership. So over to you, Salma.
So it's a really interesting one because I can give an answer, but every institution is different. So I'll give you my very Kings-based answer in that we have our student rep system who are part of KCLSQ and we give them training. They are elected at the moment. We are also looking at a system of appointment, and those reps should be gathering feedback from the students who are less engaged. I will admit this is a lot easier in person when you can just go up to someone and say, oh, yeah, what do you think of this? And it does require reps who are able to engage with those students. If you then see a problem which is across a school, you can then go to your academic associations. Not all schools have an academic association. So for example, as a biochemist, we had all the same lectures with people with anatomy, neuroscience, pharmacology, biomedical science, genetics, all the works. And we had a bioscience student association. So we could go to them and say, can you tell the university about issue? That doesn't work. You go to your students' union, obviously, shameless plug. Student unions are great. We have 6 sabbatical officers which represent various different streams, and that they tend to tie in a lot of the student opinion. So weighing up all the different work streams that the university's in to get your student union involved in lots of different committees. Although I hate to put another committee on someone's plate, I think they are valuable for the voice they do present. It shouldn't just be tokenistic. My question would always be, if your student reps aren't engaging, why is that? Is that because they feel like you're not going to make any actionable changes based on what feedback they give you? Because that could be an issue. If you're not going to make any changes, why should I bring you feedback? I think this is an issue a lot of student unions have, in that you can do that. You can make comments about this, about, oh, this isn't working. University's going to ignore it. So what's the point of me bringing feedback? So it's about showing, I will bring you feedback and you'll make the changes, but also seeing, okay, so why aren't those students engaging? And perhaps looking into digital analytics of why perhaps students aren't logging into Keats. But sometimes there are a number of personal circumstances happening in a student's life. So we need to be thinking about how we can best use a personal tutor system and other peer support and wellbeing mechanisms to support that student, because perhaps they don't want to give that student voice. They don't feel the need to represent themselves. One of my friends recently said to me, why do I need to tell the university about my issues? They should fix it. I disagree with that perspective, because I feel like if you're not going to give any feedback, you have no right to complain. This is also why I ran for president. I thought I'm sick of hearing complaining. I want to see change. And it's about looking at different models that will work for different institutions. For example, King's has now got the King's 100, which is diverse subsection of the student population across the university, and its paid role of London living wage for every session they attend, and they bring different topics to them and allow them to discuss it. So that is definitely something that needs to be explored further, whether we can incentivize student representation systems, because particularly that will diversify backgrounds. For example, you'll get more WP students applying for these roles, because then they know that they're reimbursed and for their time when they could have been working. So I think we do need to look at each institution as an individual and see what will work for them. What isn't working, I think, is important, but then also looking at what is working and expanding on that.
Okay. Thanks, Salma. Sonia, do you have anything to add about how you prepare students to partner with you?
Sure. So I suppose we have student representatives, like student consultative committee, but that is separate to our student guild or your union students. So our student representatives that are part of what you call your student union sit on our formalised committees to always impart student voice. That includes governance committees like faculty courses committee, learning and student experience committee. But aside from that, what we also do is we have student consultative committees, and these are not students that are representatives from the guild or the union. These are students that put their hand up to be the voice of the unit, and what they do is they go out and they pulse test among their peers, but we also have quarterly student consultative committees, and again, these are not union reps or guild reps. These are your garden variety students that are just putting their hand up, and what they all do is they connect in with their own peer network, and it culminates in the feedback from hundreds of students. So you're getting a richer student voice, and you're getting a voice that is additive in terms of, we often hear the guild voice or the union voice, but it is in addition to that. What we do with that student consultative committee feedback is exactly what Salma is saying. There's a feedback loop. Essentially, that's collated. That gets collated into school level issues. We all obviously report what's going well as any issues that are occurring, and then there is a required action right from PBC through to myself, or it could be that there's head of school actions or unit coordinator actions. We have to close the loop, and then an email goes out to our student group saying, you said, we did. Essentially, a campaign said, you all said that the assessment load or the flexibility or lack of flexibility on exemptions across assessments did not meet the needs. We've done this. So we very much run a you said, we did campaign. And when we engage with our student voice, we're not just looking at the deficit, we're looking at what are we doing well, and the sharing of practice around what students are liking, so that we can grow organisational capability in the right direction as well.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. Osama, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just want to share two things that we thought might have some potential. So at Surrey, we have, in a way, quite matured our student-staff partnership model. So our Surrey Institute of Education has so far published 2 edited books where every chapter was written with one of or a bunch of our students in different areas. It could be all the way how to run an effective physics lab, to how to forge a partnership, to design curriculum, to, I don't know, how student union could be more representative for the student community. It could be anything. So we kind of, in a way, I would say, matured that way. So what we do whenever we do an initiative, like when I basically launched the evaluation of the hybrid education principle, we went out for a call. We basically said we are looking for 7 to 10 students who will then be trained on some qualitative research method and quantitative data analysis. And sorry for the fire alarm, I'm going to just mute myself. Okay, it has been gone. The world of hybrid working. So, and then we train them, and we basically then tell them that you are now actively applying a research method to bring multiple voice. So it's not us doing the research. It's actually our students trained as a researcher who go out and run focus group. And these 7 students have gone out to every school, every department, had conversation with them, recorded them. They have synthesized it, put them in NVivo, and researched and figured out what needs to happen. And then you get the nuances of the subject. So that's how we do forge partnership. Alongside everything that Sonia and Salma just mentioned, we have all those systems in place. So that's one thing. The last thing I would also say that we recently tried a platform Hasn't probably worked really, really well in our business school, but we will make it better so that it could be even more effective. We gave our students a platform where student reps can discuss every issue on a daily basis on that platform in a confidential space. And once one of their issue gets a lot of thumbs up or votes, they can put that publicly to their Director of Learning and Teaching to be resolved. And on a daily basis, we are resolving that rather than waiting for a joint student sub-liaison committee that takes place once a semester. And that's another way of democratizing student voice rather than going through the hierarchy of the rep system.
Okay. Thanks, Osama. I think that actually brings us to the end of this session. There were a couple of other themes. One was going to come your way, Esther, which was there were questions around students being offered choice and do different cohorts of students respond differently. And so I don't know if there's anything in the research which you were talking about, but if you push it through to me, I'll push it out to the people who ask those questions so that we can pick up the insights from the research.
I'll share I've literally got the chat box ready, so I'll share the 2 research links in the chat and everybody can access them there.
Thanks, Esther.
Yes, I don't know about cohorts. I don't think there was enough detail in the breakdown of the students for the research for us to tell about different cohorts.
Okay. Thanks, Esther. And the other big theme in the questions was around assessment, but I know we have a track on assessment in the conference, so hopefully people can start picking up ideas from people there. So to all the panelists, Sonia, Esther, Salma and Osama, thank you so much for your contributions. That was a really good session. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to have to watch the recording as well because I was so busy watching the questions. I didn't necessarily hear all the great things that were being said. And thank you to the 292 people who are on this talk. I hope you have a great day at the conference today. So thank you very much. Bye.